Our next speaker is Sylvia Longmire. She's a former U.S. Air Force officer and special agent who's conducted numerous criminal investigations and worked extensively in the fields of counterintelligence, counterespionage, and force protection. She's an award-winning correspondent for Homeland Security Today magazine, and she collaborates regularly with the producers of National Geographic Channel's Border Wars series. And her first book, Cartel, was nominated for a Los Angeles Times Book Prize, and her latest, Border Insecurity, delves to the heart of the battle over our nation's borders and presents strategic suggestions for the future of U.S. national security. Join me in welcoming Ms. Longmire.
Is everybody okay if I just talk from up here? Thank you very much for having me. I'm always excited to be back in Texas where I can get sweet tea anywhere and anytime I want. I was so excited when Susan invited me to come here, and I can't tell you how honored I am to be on the same agenda as General McCaffrey. I've been following his work on border security for quite some time, and I'm really grateful just to be on the same stage as him talking about such an issue. Border security, it's a complicated issue. It's very complicated, and for anybody who just listens to the news or reads the news or sees what's going on the border, especially people who don't live here, a lot of folks like to ascribe a very simple solution. Wall off the border, get rid of the wall. Let everybody stay, kick everybody out. And I can tell you from doing years of research on this and writing roughly 256 pages about this, that the answer is not black and white, it's extraordinarily gray. I was very fortunate during my research to speak to many property owners in Texas, to many ranchers in Texas, also in Arizona, where I spent 2 years living in Tucson and being kind of at ground zero of everything that's going on. And I also was fortunate enough to interview former Commissioner Stables for the book. And it's just amazing how people try to simplify it. So what I'm going to do during my little talk is try to kind of give you an overview of some of the trends that we're seeing, some of the myths, some of the realities, and why it's not as black and white as some people would like to believe. How many of you have heard this statement made by either a politician or on TV that our southwest border is safer than ever? All right. How many of you, by show of hands, how many of you believe that? Okay, so now there are some people that are very vocal about saying that this is the case. Okay, former Department of Homeland Security Secretary Janet Napolitano. Then you have our current DHS Secretary Jay Johnson, former Chief of the Border Patrol David Aguilar, who's a good friend. I was actually just chatting with him last week at Homeland Security Week in Washington, D.C. And there's a basis for that statement. You take a look at border security from two different angles. You can look at it from a statistical perspective or an anecdotal perspective. They're coming from the statistical perspective. You take a look at the crime stats for the southwest border over the last 20 years, and overall violent crimes along the border are down 30%. Some of the safest cities using these crime statistics in the United States, San Diego, El Paso. El Paso has been ranked as the safest city in the United States by Congressional Quarterly Press magazine for like the last 3 years. And so coming from their perspective, that's the situation. Now you have other folks that believe differently based on their own experience, their perspective, and anecdotal evidence. You have Sheriff Paul Babu. How many of you have seen him on Fox News? He is the Pinal County Sheriff in Arizona. Then you have, obviously, former Governor Rick Perry, who's been very vocal and has taken many steps, took many steps on his own during the governorship to reinforce border security, send National Guard troops down to the Texas-Mexico border. And then you have the situation, like I'm a contributing editor for Breitbart Texas, and we're the ones who broke the photos about the humanitarian child crisis of that border surge that started to happen last spring. So a lot of folks, the first thing is, well, don't we have a border fence and should we have more of it? According to the Secure Fence Act, of 2006, we're supposed to have roughly 700 miles of double reinforced fence. Right now, we're at about 672, I believe. Half of that is what we call pedestrian fence, which is just kind of a straight fence where you can't walk through it. And then roughly the other half is a vehicle barrier, where you have Normandy barriers, rail and post, where a truck can't get through it, but somebody can just kind of easily walk over it. Now, this is an example of a bollard-style fence. Many of you have probably seen this style. It's very, very common in the Rio Grande Valley. And this is just a screenshot from a video in which these folks climbed to the top of the fence in 18 seconds. Just an example of how it's not really designed to stop everything. This was taken in 2011. This was a catapult, very, very old school, that was being used to launch packages of illegal drugs over the fence to the waiting party on the U.S. side. Then you have this lovely custom-built contraption, which was a ramp that was designed to go over the fence, and a vehicle carrying loads of marijuana could easily, one of them got stuck in Yuma sector and was pivoting and didn't really make it all the way across. But you can see the ingenuity. Now, if you ask, and I know that because I've asked them, you ask Border Patrol, and Border Patrol agents have told me that the fence is not designed to stop anyone or stop anything. It is a deterrent. It is meant to slow people down long enough for Border Patrol to react and apprehend individuals that are trying to get over it or pass things through it. And in some parts of the border, the fence really works. I've been to many sectors. San Diego sector was one of the busiest sectors until they put up the secondary border fence. They started in 2009 and they started to finish roughly around 2011. You have stadium lighting out there. You have finely paved road out there. And they have cameras, concertina wire. It's insane how much stuff they have there. And as soon as that secondary fence was completed, you saw the apprehension statistics for that sector just drop dramatically. But then what happened? All of that foot traffic, whether it's immigrants, whether it's traffickers, all that gets pushed out, moving east. So wherever there's not a fence, you're just going to start seeing more traffic, and in some cases, those parts of the border are very, very dangerous. Then you have parts of the border, like in my former state of Arizona, where I was living in Tucson, Yuma sector. There's nothing out there. I'm a huge Star Wars nerd. I don't know if any of you saw or remember Return of the Jedi, where it was nothing but just dunes and dunes and dunes of sand. That was filmed in the Imperial Valley sand dunes. There's a huge fence out there. It looks like a zipper running right down the ridge of those sand dunes. You take away the fence, and I'm pretty sure there's not going to be a whole lot of anything crawling across there anyway. But Yuma sector has one of the lowest apprehension rates in the entire border because combine the fence with the horrible environmental conditions, and there you have it, success. Then you go to South Texas, and it's a completely different story, and we'll talk about that shortly. So if we can't do it with a physical barrier, then maybe technology is the answer. Well, we had in 2006 under the Secure Border Initiative what they called the virtual fence. This was designed to be a system that integrated existing underground sensors, which there's roughly, I believe, 13,000 of them under the southwest border. Some of them are 30, 35 years old. The pure detection rate or success rate is somewhere around 5%, so they're not very good. Designed to integrate those with fixed towers, surveillance systems, radios, etc. Basically, it's just an invisible fence designed to identify and detect any illegal crossers so that Border Patrol could respond. Initially, it was going to cost roughly $276 million, and Boeing, who won the contract for it, said they were going to be able to put it up within 2 years. To make a very long story short, 5 years and $1 billion later, it was deemed by former Secretary Napolitano as non-functional. And right now, there are only a handful of towers that are left as a remnant of this virtual border project, and currently DHS is finding ways to integrate those existing towers with a new system that doesn't use technology that's custom designed, what they call off the shelf. So they're still working on it, but we're down $1 billion of your taxpayer dollars. So technology, maybe not, it's all it's cracked up to be. So border residents are tired of waiting. Hey, this is Texas. We're used to taking matters into our own hands here when the federal government doesn't do its job, right? So then you have groups like Arizona Border Defenders, you have militias in both states, or vigilantes in both states, or border defenders, however you want to call them. But it's folks that just say, we're tired of waiting. Some of them go out there and all they do is go out there with cameras There's actually, I believe, Operation Drawbridge, which is a very light version of this, where it was border ranchers that were just putting game cameras, $300 game cameras, that's it, on their property, and all that information was being relayed directly to the sheriffs and DPS, and they were catching a bunch of people just by this coalition between private property owners and law enforcement, and that worked great. But then you have some crazy people, like in Arizona, that go out there with guns, they go out dressed, looking like cartel drug smugglers, and we had a situation not long ago where they came up on some scientists who they were researching some kind of lizard or other animal in the desert, thought they were drug smugglers and pulled rifles on them. These are unarmed scientists. So you have the potential, and this has happened in South Texas, where you've had interactions between armed private citizens, National Guard, you throw Border Patrol in there, and there's a potential for things to get very ugly very quickly. So you move away from the border, away from the desert, and you go up to Washington, D.C., and now we have a blame game going on over whose fault is it that our borders are not as secure as we would like. So you have a chicken and the egg problem in D.C. On the Democrat side of the aisle, you have, and I'm generalizing here, that immigration reform needs to be done now. Border security, we'll take care of that whenever we can take care of that, but this is unsustainable and we have to come up with comprehensive immigration reform now. Then you move over to the other side of the aisle where you have, again, in general, the Republican Party saying that we're not even going to touch immigration reform until we secure the borders first. However, that gets a little challenging when we don't really know what border security means or what a secure border looks like, and that's part of the problem. So what does a secure border look like? Now, I have a feeling that if you ask 10 people on Capitol Hill what's the finish line, you're going to get 10 different answers. And I have a feeling that I might get 170 or however many different answers from the folks in this very room. It's very subjective, and that's part of the problem. So does it look like this? Does it look like the Berlin Wall? Does it look like the Great Wall of China? At the opposite end of the spectrum, is it an invisible wall? Do we take care of border security or immigration or anybody coming across either from a virtual perspective using technology or just take care of it from a policy and an administrative situation, whereas we just apprehend folks when they eventually get to where they're going and handle it from there? Or is it kind of a halfway measure? Is there some kind of answer in between? Now, in my humble opinion, at least in my book, I kind of offer my own definition of what I think a secure border looks like, because I'm the one who's up here talking, so I can tell you what I think. So our borders will be considered secure when U.S. citizens can reasonably expect that our enemies, we'll get to that in a second, cannot penetrate them without resorting to extraordinary means for which there are no existing countermeasures. You're never going to stop everybody. You are never, ever, ever going to stop 100% of anything. The Berlin Wall tells you this, the Great Wall of China, Hadrian's Wall back in 1200, whatever, tells you this. I played volleyball in high school. I don't know how many of you have ever played volleyball in an indoor court before, but you only have 4 people receiving a serve on the court at one time. And I'll tell you right now, in a standard formation, you have your 2 back corners on the court. Those 2 back corners are open, and guess what? If that server on the other side manages to nail you in that very, very corner, there's no way you're going to get to it. And you know what you have to say? You have to say, you know what? Give it to them because they were that good. And as a nation, it's very, very difficult. Hey, we're America. We don't give it to anybody. We don't just give away security. But this is reality. If you have a smuggler working for a cartel that has unlimited funds in the millions and sometimes billions of dollars and comes up with some kind of method that we have never ever dreamed of, that DPS or Border Patrol or DPS, whoever, has never dreamed of, and they manage to get a drug load across because we couldn't think of a way to stop it until after it's done, well, guess what? Give it to them. It sucks to say that, and it's really hard, but that's reality, and that's kind of the world that I live in. So I highlighted our enemies. So we have to think, okay, who are our enemies? We can't stop them unless we can define who they are. So let's take a look at who's coming across the border. You've got 3 groups of people, again, that you can generally categorize. Terrorists and potential terrorists. This is a controversial subject and I don't have time to dig into it, but this is the Hezbollah flag. To sum up, long story short, there's plenty of evidence. We know that Hezbollah is coming across in smaller numbers than most people think, but there's a history of Hezbollah members coming across, particularly from Tijuana into California. And they're coming across to make money. There's been thousands of Hezbollah members living in the United States and coming in the United States for a long time. They come here to make money. They come here to make money selling fake purses. You go to New York and you buy a fake pair of Nikes or a fake Louis Vuitton purse, guess where that money's going? It's going back home to support the cause. They're selling fake cigarettes in North Carolina and in Michigan. They're selling fake everything. That's what they do. They make money. They don't want to ruin that cash cow. They've been doing that in the tri-border area in Latin America for a really, really long time, and that's what they come here to do. As of right now, there is no clinical, hardcore, solid evidence that operational terrorists, and what I mean by operational is somebody coming here with a specific plan to blow something up, has come here from Mexico. Why? Because it's easier to fly here. How did all the 9/11 terrorists get here? How were the underwear bomber, the shoe bomber, how are all these people coming here? There are ISIS and other groups and Al-Qaeda and other terrorist organizations. It's so much easier for them just to hire somebody that has a clean background, has no criminal history, is not on a terrorist watch list. Buy them a ticket, give them a passport and fly them here. That's how we're finding that people are getting here. It's a lot harder to get here from Mexico this way than it is to just get on a plane. But again, that's a long story, and I'd be more than happy to talk your ear off about that a little bit later. But anyway, people like Hezbollah, again, come here to raise money, tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of the overall group of people coming across. Then you have the drug smugglers. We know the Zetas are operating here, the Gulf Cartel is operating here, all sorts of people, and General McCaffrey will talk about this a little bit later. But anywhere that you have a demand for illegal drugs, you either have members of cartels or their proxies, people dealing for them on the street, people working for street gangs. Roughly 90% of illegal drugs that are being consumed here in the United States coming from Mexico. And a lot of these folks are coming back and forth. Some of them have residency here. But again, overall, as far as the population goes of people coming across, the cartels, drug smugglers, violent criminals, rapists, murderers, still a very small percentage compared to the overall flow. Then finally, you have what in general, again, I will call economic migrants, illegal immigrants, undocumented immigrants, however politically correct you want to get. I'm not politically correct, if you can figure that out by now. I'm just going to call them illegal immigrants for now. And these are folks that have no criminal history, that are coming to reunite with family members, they're coming here to go to school, they're coming here to find jobs. This is the vast majority of the folks that are coming across, yet we are dedicating the vast majority of our very overworked and very underpaid law enforcement resources to deal with these folks. So let's take a look at this particular group, and this comprises the majority of the people coming across illegally. So these lines represent kind of the main routes that are being taken by immigrants that are coming here to the border. Now, historically speaking, Arizona has kind of been the hotbed for all of this traffic. At one point, 50% of illegal immigrants that were coming into the United States from Mexico were going through Arizona. I mean, it was crazy. But in the last couple of years, we've started to see a shift, not only in the routes that are being taken, but the demographic of the groups of people that are coming across. So what happened is that now they're coming here. For the first time in kind of the history of illegal immigration along the southwest border, you have the majority, it's a small majority, but a majority nonetheless, that are not going through Arizona, they're going through South Texas. And only, I believe, last year or the year before, did you have a majority of those folks. They're not mostly Mexican anymore, they're mostly Central American, from El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala. Why are they coming to South Texas? Well, look at the geography. It's the closest point. And that route that they're taking is right through Gulf Cartel territory and right through Zetas territory. So it's become more dangerous, it's become more profitable, and everything, kind of the face of illegal immigration in just the last 2 to 3 years has completely changed because of this shift. So statistics are boring, but all I want you to look at is the lines in the pictures. It's not real clear, but this is total illegal immigrant apprehensions in Texas between fiscal year 2004 and 2013. So you saw a spike right before 2006, and that's when the Secure Fence Act was initiated. So you see a huge drop in apprehensions. But then you start moving to 2011, and that top line, it's hard to see, that's for the Rio Grande Valley, and that's a huge spike. So we start seeing not just the kids, but illegal immigrants in general from Central America. They started coming here en masse years before this surge that happened last year that DHS said that they were caught off guard. This is a trend that started a few years ago. Here's more evidence of that. This is OTM, other than Mexican apprehensions, mostly against Central Americans in Texas fiscal year, 2004 to 2013. Relatively speaking, pretty flat, a little bit of a spike in the Del Rio sector right before the fence started, and again, it's hard to see that purple line, but then again, there's a huge spike between 2011 and 2012 Rio Grande Valley sector. And then finally, UAC, unaccompanied alien children, and that was the term that was given to all the unaccompanied minors and families and stuff that came during that surge last year. Well, guess what? That surge didn't start last year. That surge started in 2011. More or less flat in all those sectors, and then Rio Grande Valley sector starts to spike right after 2011. So this has been a long time coming. So what happened with the border surge? Most of you know or have read in the news. It was roughly 90,000, I believe. That was the last statistics I saw, maybe a little bit more. That came last year starting in April and then rounded out. I think it started to slow down roughly in September. Completely overwhelmed detention centers in Texas, completely overwhelmed DHS. We were feeling the effects of it in Arizona because the detention centers couldn't hold everybody, so they had to start putting people in buses, sending them out to Laredo, to El Paso, to Tucson, even out to California. California didn't want them, so it became very controversial. Then you had some kids that had to be handed over to Department of Health and Human Services. It was pretty insane. Things started to slow down, and now we're starting to see that there's more of a surge. And the Border Patrol has said that this is seasonal. We've seen this happen before. And as I showed you in the statistics, it's not like this started yesterday. So for DHS to say that we were caught off guard, we were caught flat-footed, the statistics have been there for several years. We started to see that shift moving from Arizona to South Texas. We started to see that shift. No longer all Mexican, now it's going to be more Central American. Yet, in my opinion, DHS, they should have seen this coming and they should have been better prepared, and instead we got the surge that we got last summer. So, as I mentioned, the groups of people were coming from three main countries, El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala. Where you see the bigger circles there, that's where, those are the cities or the parts of those countries where those individuals are coming from. The biggest circle by far is over San Pedro Sula, considered one of the most violent, if not the most violent city in the world, has one of the highest, if not the highest murder rate in the world by now. That is Gangland Central. So those circles, that's where these folks were coming from. So why now? Now, we all know that, man, stuff's been bad. I mean, really, really bad in Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala for a long time. It's not like they were rich 5 years ago. The violence has been there, the poverty has been there, the lack of job opportunities, the gangs have been there. So why all of a sudden in the last couple of years has this insanity been going on? Because the cartels got involved. Cartels have really changed in the last decade or so on how they make their money. It used to be the old school cartels that it was all drugs all the time. Family-run businesses, historical, the branches that split off from the Guadalajara cartel back in the late 1980s. Then you started with Los Zetas, which Texans are very familiar with, that started out as a private army in the late 1990s for the kingpin of the Gulf cartel. Then you have all these smaller cartels that are cropping up that are learning from the big boys, from the old boys, but they're making up their own rules. They don't play by the rules of the mafia anymore. They see a money-making opportunity, and if it involves innocent people, whether it's migrants, whether it's business owners in Mexico, whether it's just regular people, they don't care. They don't care. And you know what they see when they see those flows of people going right through their territory? They see a money-making opportunity. Anybody know how much money each of those migrants is paying their coyote to get them to the border? Anywhere between $3,000 to $10,000 per person. And the cartel gets at least 25% of that. So these cartel guys, guess where they're going to drum up business? They're going to El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala, and they're going and saying, hey, now is the time to go. they're playing off of our immigration policies and the publicity surrounding them, saying, hey, guess what? The judges, they're giving away permisos for you to come across. It's not a permiso, it's not a permit. What happens is when they get apprehended by Border Patrol and they get processed, they get a notice to appear. So they're given a date to show up in front of an immigration judge to have their hearing for asylum. Well, guess how long it takes for that hearing to happen because of the backlog? Anywhere from 3 to 5 years. So when they come here, that's what happens with the border search. They turn themselves in to Border Patrol. They don't put up a fight. They go. They say, we want asylum because we're coming from a really, really bad place and with really, really mean people. They go through the credible fear process of getting interviewed. They say, okay, come back to see the judge in 3 years. And a lot can happen in those 3 years while they get released on bond to go be with their families or wherever they go. So again, the cartels are able to pass this rumor, pass this information along and say, come with me, I'll totally hook you up with a coyote, pay me your money, you pay him his money, and we'll get you up to the United States. So now that the cartels are involved, this has become just a huge, huge moneymaker. So what are some of the current border security measures that we have in place to try to mitigate this? 18,156, that may have changed in the last month or so. Border Patrol agents assigned to the southwest border, more than ever before in our history. 652, sorry, I gave you the wrong number, 652 miles of fencing. That should be 700 according to the Secure Fence Act, but I'm told that they're working on it. 12 predator bees that are along the southwest border. 2 of them that have a system called Vader, which can see a person, I think it's from either 30,000 or 50,000 feet, identify a person putting a letter in a mailbox. Absolutely insane. 2 of those systems right now, which are awesome. And then we have the Integrated Fixed Tower Project. As I mentioned before, these are the remnants of the virtual fence project. On top of those towers, they have sensors, radar, all sorts of stuff to try to detect people that are coming across. Some of the trends in physical solutions. There is so, okay, I go to border security conferences, at least 2 or 3 or Homeland Security every year. You go into these expo halls, this was Border Security Expo last year, and it's hundreds of vendors with some of the coolest stuff you've ever seen in tech solutions. And the cost, relatively speaking, is really, really good. There are universities working in partnership with private companies in places like Tucson, Arizona. Stuff that the collaboration is unprecedented, in my opinion, to not only research these solutions, but actually put them into practice on the border. The problem is that DHS does not have a standardized process for getting this stuff in front of the decision makers. You know how these guys, they put millions of dollars just into R&D for these systems, and they just pray that the right people from the Science and Technology Division at DHS are going up and down the aisles in these expo halls, take a look at that tech and say, hey, to their assistant, jot this down, take that guy's card, I really like that, I want to set up a meeting. That's how it works. And it's not really working that great because that's how Boeing got to get $1 billion for a system that never worked. So it's not that technology isn't there. It's not that we're not producing. It's just that connecting A to B is not being very efficient at the moment. So current policy initiatives. Secure Our Borders First Act. This went in front of Congress back in January, I believe, and it's still sitting there. Some of the provisions that I want to give you for this. Achieve operational control of the southwest border in 5 years. To give you an example of operational control, right now I think the number, operational control is the ability that once a breach of the border is detected, the ability for Border Patrol to respond within a reasonable amount of time. The overall operational control number for the southwest border right now I think sits at 44%. For the northern border it sits at 2%. And it took over a decade just to get to 44%. And now this bill wants 90% or 100% within 5 years. So just to give you an example of how realistic this is. Completion of the 700 miles of border fence, deployment of 19 technology platforms, minimum of 130,000 CBP, Office of Air and Marine Flight Hours. That was one of the biggest criticisms by the Government Accountability Office a couple of years ago of the Predator Project, is you've got these awesome Predators that do amazing things, but they weren't flying anywhere near what their allotted flight hours were. The support system on the ground was complete crap. CBP is trying to fix that. I'll give them that much. They are trying to fix it. But you have people involved. You have a lot of people involved. And whenever you have people involved, you have mismanagement involved. So it's an uphill battle. Submission of 28 metrics to measure border security. I'm all about standardization. I'm all about having numbers, because how can you measure success or failure if you don't have numbers? These 28 metrics, who's going to be following them, and how many agents do you have to take off the line catching bad guys to go measure the numbers, report the numbers, put them on paper, send them in an email, and compile them? So just remember that. I was a former special agent, so I know how these things go. The provision of Department of Defense assets and National Guard funding, and grants Border Patrol access to federal lands. So this bill was sponsored by Martha McSally out in Arizona and Chairman Michael McCall, Chairman of the Homeland Security Committee. I interviewed Chairman McCall for my book. He's a good man, he knows what he's talking about, and he's realistic. However, a lot of the stuff that gets put before Congress when it comes to Homeland Security, a lot of it is rhetoric, a lot of it is unrealistic, and that is very frustrating for somebody like me, because when you want to see real change, when you want to see the implementation of actual solid solutions that can possibly work, I don't want somebody putting on a show. I don't want somebody pandering to voters. I want somebody to put something in front of me that will actually work, and I don't believe that this is it. I don't agree with Secretary Jay Johnson on a lot of things, but this is a quote from him that I have to say that I'm on board with. The bill is extreme to the point of being unworkable. If it acted, it would actually leave the border less secure. Sets mandatory and highly prescriptive standards. Even the Border Patrol says, you know what, this isn't gonna work. And when Border Patrol, they're the men and women on the front line. When they're saying this isn't gonna happen, maybe somebody should listen. That's just my opinion, but I'm the one up here. Immigration reform, and this is kind of a snapshot from last year. This was before both the House and the Senate were Republican, but we're still not seeing any movement on Capitol Hill. There's very little political will to move in any direction on immigration reform, and that's really frustrating to a lot of the folks that are out there. So some suggested solutions. Right now, we are treating these groups of people from an interdiction perspective as equal, whether it's terrorists, drug smugglers, immigrants, economic migrants that are coming here, again, looking for work, non-criminal immigrants. Now, here's the problem when you treat all of them equally, is that they're all a law enforcement problem. We are not approaching, in my opinion, formerly as a force protection analyst, from a threat perspective. Out of those, my humble opinion, out of those three groups of people, the first group, the terrorists, that's a national security threat. That is drug smugglers, violent criminals. That is a national security threat. Illegal immigrants that have no criminal history, that are coming here for a job, they're coming here to reunite with family. In my humble opinion, to me, that is not a national security threat. That is an administrative problem. That is an administrative backlog that requires an administrative, a policy, a legislative solution. Meanwhile, you have the men and women in green and blue, the sheriffs, the police that are out there expending a lot of resources, a lot of manpower, going after all three groups. In my opinion, I'd rather have them spending their time and effort going after people that are coming here to kill us and stuff. That's just a personal opinion, but maybe that's where we should start with immigration reform. I don't know what the answer is. If I knew what the answer was to immigration reform, I'd be writing another book and making a lot more money than I'm making right now. But I'm going to try to sum it up because I'm running out of time. I'm a business owner, okay? I run 3 businesses, so I'm all about making a profit. And I'm all about trying to strengthen the U.S. economy. Remember the number that I threw out there before about how much money each of those immigrants that was coming here was paying a coyote, $3,000 to $10,000? What if each of those migrants was paying, let's be humble about it, let's not be greedy. What if each one of those, and we caught 500,000 of them last year, paid $1,000 to the U.S. government for a permit to come here for a limited amount of time, whether that permit is to work. What if they had a sponsor here, whether that sponsor is already a resident that's living here, they have 6 months to find a job to enroll in school, and both that individual and that sponsor are responsible for that person if they decide to commit a crime, and if they can't find a job, if they can't get enrolled in school after 6 months, you get to go. The work permits, I have a slide here. The wait times, people are going to come anyway. It takes 20 years for somebody to come here legally. When you live in Honduras and you have somebody pointing a gun to your 8-year-old son's head, and saying that we're going to kill you, your mom, your baby sister if you don't come act as a lookout for the gang. Do you think, I'm a mom of 2 boys, do you think I'm going to wait until somebody decides to reform whatever? I'm not going to wait 20 years. I'm going to come anyway. My family came from Cuba in the 1960s fleeing the tyranny of Fidel Castro and the communist revolution. They came legally, but there's others that come on a boat through shark-infested waters in the Caribbean. You think they're going to wait for Castro to go away? Well, guess what? 50 years later, they're still there. These folks are not going to wait. So how do we make money off of it? How do we let our economy benefit from people that are going to come here anyway? Again, I'm the one who's up here with the microphone. Just a suggestion. Again, if I had the answer, I would be making a lot more money, so I'm just throwing stuff out there. The agricultural visas, I can't even go into the numbers of how difficult, because I know a lot of these farmers from Washington to Massachusetts, how difficult it is to find U.S. citizen labor to work some of these farms. Let's find a program that works so that the farmers aren't spending thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars to bring these folks here legally, so they're not incentivized to bring folks and pay them illegally in very dangerous conditions. So, and finally, invest in solutions at the source so that the recruits for these cartels have jobs, have employment opportunities, have educational opportunities, because that's who the cartels are recruiting. It's not about interdiction. It's not about providing special forces down in Latin America. It's about bolstering their economy. It's about bolstering their education system so that they can help pull themselves up. I know we have a Q&A session a little bit later, so I'm not going to take questions right now. But thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for having me here. It's been a real honor to speak to you today.